Chapter 7. Reactions. A few days after the confrontation with Harry Potter, Lucius Malfoy was still pacing around his study. He didn't like how that meeting went at all. How could he have let an 11-year-old child get the best of him like that? He was furious at himself, furious at Draco, and even more furious at Potter and Dumbledore. However, there was something about the boy, something he didn't like to think about. The body posture, the coldness of the eyes, the tone of the voice, and the preciousann. Lucius shivered. It couldn't be, could it? He thought. Even he knew it was possible that the Dark Lord wasn't dead. He wasn't stupid. The Dark Mark was inactive, not gone. Could the boy actually be the Dark Lord? He asked himself, and the thought made him stop in his tracks in front of the fireplace. He didn't know if it was even possible, but then again the voice, eyes, posture, and preciousann. Lucius shivered again. Narcissa! He shouted, turning and running out of the study and into the library, where he knew she'd be reading. Narcissa! What is it, Lucius? She asked, placing the book onto the table beside her. You look ashen. What is wrong? The boy. He said, looking frantic. I think the Potter boy is the Dark Lord. She stared at him with wide eyes. Surely you don't think? I don't know how it would be possible, but it is the Dark Lord we are talking about. He is very powerful and capable of anything. She gasped and searched her husband's face frantically. Draco has been antagonizing the Dark Lord. It was not a question, but a statement. She too had caught the similarities, but had been afraid to voice them out loud. Are we in danger, Lucius? Has Draco angered him? I think I have angered him more than Draco. Surely Draco antagonizing him hasn't helped though. Lucius said, nervously running a hand through his long blonde hair. You heard what the Potter boy said. I don't think he would be very happy with you. I know I wouldn't. The Potter boy said that. He exclaimed. We need to warn Draco. Narcissa said, placing a hand on Lucius's arm to calm him. Talk to Severus, and tell Draco not to irritate Potter. However, do not tell Draco that we think Potter is the Dark Lord. If we are wrong, we don't want to anger the real one. Understand? That is very wise thinking, my dear. Excellent suggestion. Lucius said, kissing his wife lightly on her cheek. I will return, and I'll let you know what Severus says. Narcissa nodded, and watched as Lucius flew to Hogwarts. Draco had already left the Potion Master's office, and Severus watched as Lucius flew back to Malfoy Manor before he let loose with loud and boisterous laughter. It was rather uncharacteristic for him, but it felt good. Once he calmed down, but still grinning like a schoolboy, he made his way over to one of the cupboards he used for spare potion files, and poured himself a drink. He really couldn't fault Lucius though. After all, if Severus didn't know the truth, he would be thinking the exact same thing. He sat down in his desk chair, swirled the amber liquid in his glass, and pondered about how much his life had changed in the last few weeks. It felt like a giant weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He felt light-hearted and free, and it all started when he realized Lily was alive. Severus closed his eyes and remembered the memory Salazar had shown him that day. Lily was sitting on a black leather couch, in what seemed to be a study, with Potter right beside her and Salazar sitting across from them. She looked older, but still as pretty as ever. Her hair was still just as red, and her eyes were still the vibrant green he loved. She was crying though. Crying over him. Crying over Severus. I feel it's all my fault. Lily said through her tears. If I had forgiven Severus for calling me a mudblood, he would have never joined Voldemort. It's my fault he turned out like that. I know he was your best friend, Lily, but you can't blame yourself for his choices. I understand that, James, but I still feel somewhat responsible for it. Then she looked at Salazar with pleading eyes. Salazar, promise me something. What is it, Lily? Salazar asked gently. Promise me that if Severus has changed, that if he opposes Voldemort and regrets being a Death Eater, promise me that you will take him under your wing. Trust him. James is right. Severus is the reason Voldemort asked me to step aside. I know it in my heart. Please Salazar, I know how you feel about Death Eaters, but please, put aside that anger for him. I know deep down in my heart that Severus is a good man. James Potter nodded in agreement. Sirius and I gave him hell, and I feel that it is partly our fault too. I judged him too quickly. Even as young as we were, I loved Lily the moment I set eyes on her, and I was jealous because of their friendship. I should not have tormented Snape, and I regret that I did. If Lily knows in her heart that he is a good man, then I believe her. Salazar nodded. I will take it under advisement. Thank you Salazar. Lily said with a hopeful bright smile. I love him. He was my best friend, and if he regrets his decisions, please tell him I forgive him. Snape's eyes opened at that moment, and the words floated around in his head. She loves me. He thought. If only as a friend, but she loves and forgives me. I heard it in her voice, and seen it in her eyes. Forgiveness and love. He smiled and nodded to himself. He, as ludicrous as it sounds, even forgave James Potter that day. James had apologized, vouched on Snape's behalf, and agreed with Lily. Both of them sent Salazar to him, and he certainly wasn't angry over that. How could he be? To all those who have been sorted into Slytherin House, Salazar Slytherin was a man to be admired and respected. It was widely believed that Salazar was ruthless, cunning, cold, stern, and uncaring. Most in Slytherin mimicked that perceived image, and Severus was one of them. He had molded his own ruthless, cunning, stern, cold, and uncaring behavior after him, but he was quickly realizing that that perceived image was far from the truth. Salazar was not a god, that much he knew. The man was not perfect. He had his fair share of sorrows and regrets, and had made many mistakes in his life. Salazar had admitted to him that immortality was his greatest mistake and regret. When Snape had asked why, he saw the pain in Salazar's eyes, but the man had sighed and told him. I regret my immortality because that was the final straw. For years Godric and I had bickered over Moleborns, moles, and dark magic, but we always got past that. I understood his views and he understood mine. We butted heads from time to time, but it was not what drove us apart. What drove us apart was my quest for immortality. He told me it was too dark, and that he could not condone it. I argued and said living forever would be wonderful. We could see the world change before our eyes. Watch as each new generation of witches and wizards came through the doors of Hogwarts, and learned all they could. I even tried to entice him by saying that one day we could live side by side with the Muggles in peace. Just like in Merlin's early years. He didn't fall for it. I wanted my best friend to take this journey with me. We were brothers, best friends, war buddies even. He had my back, I had his, and there was no question about it. But he refused. He said he couldn't bring himself to meddle with that kind of dark magic. It was unnatural. He was fine with the subtler dark magic such as potions and blood magic, but not immortality. I never understood why. He told me I'd regret it. I told him I wouldn't. He tried, for all he was worth, he tried to get me to see his reasons. All I saw was my best friend abandoning me. I was a stubborn fool, and I left that night. Helga and Rowena were devastated, but Godric took it the worst. He was never the same after that, or so I was later told. They said he was lost, and so he threw himself into Hogwarts to take his mind off my absence. It worked for a time, but in the end he died angry. Angry at me. I last saw him at his funeral. It was held in these very walls, and I haven't been back to Hogwarts since, until now. My greatest regret and mistake is immortality because I lost my best friend over it. I hurt the ones I loved, and I watched them die. My wife had died in childbirth years before, and my children were grown with families of their own. They weren't interested in immortality, but I promised that I would watch over a family line, and I wish I hadn't because of what it has become. The world is not what I had hoped. It is worse, much worse. All I have is memories, and because I can never die, I can never tell Gordrick I'm sorry. I can never tell him he was right. I will never be able to hear him say, I told you so. That night, Severus had learned that even the Slytherin, the original and most cunning of them all, had made mistakes and had regrets. Just like Severus did. Salazar also told him that you can't let your mistakes and regrets run your life. Hold on to the regrets and remember your mistakes so that you learn from them, but don't let them run your life. Salazar had told him that in many ways Severus was even more fortunate than himself. At least Severus could hear Lily tell him that she loves and forgives him, and that is why Severus's life had changed. That is why he can now forgive. He no longer had the desire to hold a grudge. He no longer had a reason to despair. It is also why he could now laugh. Severus smiled and sipped his whiskey as he remembered the shortcut incident. He didn't even know if Voldemort himself could have pulled that off and seem innocent in the process. If he didn't know any better, he would think it had been an accident for Salazar to disappear through that painting. Also in Dumbledore's office with the Malfoys, Severus himself had been shocked at what Salazar said, but it's how he said it, and how he pulled it off that had left him in awe. Salazar had come out of nowhere with his words, and left Lucius thoroughly speechless at the verbal lashing he had received. The man was truly cunning, and Snape knew he had a lot to learn from him. And learning from his mistakes, regrets, and his new mentor, is what he was going to do. My old friend. I am happy to inform you that the person I mentioned in my last letter has agreed to help us. They tell me that your property is here, and will be guarded by several traps. Some of these traps are already in place, but some are still being worked on, so your property is not in place just yet. What exactly those traps are though, he does not know. However, we do know of two. One he placed himself, and one that I found out about. Speaking of the traps, you won't believe the one I found out about. 2 students found it, who told another student, and the tale was overheard by another 2 students, who told me. I am outraged that this trap was placed in a school full of children. I will go into detail later, but suffice to say, your other friend is lucky I haven't hexed him. It doesn't matter about the traps though, because I have a way to retrieve your property easily without risking life and limb to get it. I also plan to make the trap that was told to me a little less accessible by children that could be eaten by it. As soon as my friend lets me know that your property is in place, I will get it and put it where it will be safe. Also, I have a lead on what our mutual enemy is doing. I'm watching a person who I think is a follower. Oh, and I am sorry for all the shouting. Please forgive me. Your old friend. Me. With shaking hands, Nicholas placed the letter on his dining room table, after reading it out loud to his wife. Perenelle had her face buried in her hands and was shaking her head. Children could be eaten? She moaned. Oh Nicholas, we should have never. I know my darling, I know. But I have full confidence that Salazar will make sure that the children are safe. As well as getting the stone and putting it in his flat. My confidence in Albus, however, is now shaky at best. What in the world has possessed him to put the children in danger of being eaten? He asked in disbelief. My stone is not worth that. Well, I know I won't breathe easy until this mess is over, she said with a dignified huff. Nicholas nodded his head. I agree, my dear, I agree. It had nearly been a week since Harry blew up his office with accidental magic, but Albus sighed as he watched the young man sitting at the end of the Slytherin table that was closest to the head table. He was reading a book and eating breakfast just like every morning. Albus sighed again and studied the boy. The other Slytherins were still ignoring him. No one wanted to sit near Harry because of Nora, and because Harry had the ability to talk to her. There were at least 4 seats between him and the next person, but no one dared to sit in front of him because the little black snake always sat in front of his plate. He noticed that the other Slytherins always looked at Harry with either fearful looks or hateful ones, and Albus didn't like that. Worse than that though, was how Harry reacted to it. It seemed that Harry didn't care, and actually preferred it that way. It seemed that Harry liked not having any friends. Sure, the Longbottom boy and the Granger girl were friendly with him, but they weren't really friends. Harry taught them things, and was also friendly with them, but he didn't get too close to them. They mostly studied together, and asked him for help from time to time. They would sit with Harry every so often and play with Nora and talk a little, but never for long because of the hostile glares they received from the other Slytherins, and Harry had only sat at the Gryffindor table that one time. Albus didn't like that either. Harry needed friends that he could trust and rely on. No child should be without friends, especially Harry. Albus also didn't like the fact that Harry was a Slytherin. He should be in Gryffindor just like his parents had been. He should not be in a house that was full of dark families that could influence his young mind. Albus was already unnerved by the fact that the boy had read about the Unforgivables and wondered what other kinds of dark magic he had read about. Albus could not allow any more of that sort of thing to happen. Albus, however, couldn't deny the fact that the boy was cunning. The verbal lashing that he gave Lucius Malfoy was testament to that, and Albus was still shocked by the boy's words, actions, and downright coldness. It made Albus shiver because it reminded him of another boy that walked the halls of Hogwarts almost 50 years ago. Tom Riddle had also talked about power, and having knowledge that it would give him an advantage over his enemies. Harry shouldn't be having these same thoughts. He was an 11-year-old boy. He shouldn't be having such thoughts because he was too young. What could have caused Harry to be this way? He wondered, as he continued to study the boy. Was it from the abuse he had to endure from his family? Even Albus couldn't deny the fact the boy had been abused. He saw it with his own eyes that night. He knew that the boy would have a hard life with Petunia and Vernon, but it was the safest place for Harry to go, and unfortunately, it still is. Even if it meant that Harry would still be abused, Harry still needed to go live with his family in the summer. He tried to explain it to Minerva, but she wouldn't hear of it. She was furious, and let Albus have an earful. She wouldn't let it go, so he finally had to obviate the poor woman's knowledge of the abuse. It had been for the greater good. He knew Severus wouldn't care about that the boy had been abused, so he did not have to obviate him, and as for Quirrell, well. Albus was worried though, worried that he had already lost Harry to the dark. However, he would soon know for sure. He looked down the length of the head table and glanced at Quirrell, and his eyes flickered to the man's turban. Yes, Albus would know if Harry was light or dark by the end of the year. Quirrell, nor his companion for that matter, saw Albus looking at them because they were also studying the boy. Voldemort was quite intrigued with Harry, and dare he admit, amused as well. The child had trumped Lucius that night and blown up Dumbledore's office. Voldemort chuckled at the memory. If the old fool wasn't careful, he would lose his precious Potter. The boy was not stupid, even the Dark Lord had to admit that. Harry deserved to be in Slytherin with his cunning, talk of power, and his clear ambition to deal with his enemies. But does Potter consider me an enemy? Voldemort wondered. Surely he does, but yet he didn't outright deny it when Albus asked how he felt about me. It was no matter though. Voldemort would just keep a close eye on the boy and figure out what to do about him later. Right now he had to concentrate on getting the stone. He was certain that Albus didn't know he was actually here himself, possessing the incompetent stuttering fool Quirrell. He would know if Albus suspected, because Albus wouldn't let him be this close to the Potter boy if he did. So for now, he was fairly comfortable where he was and would be patient, until it was the right time to strike. Draco glared at Harry and wondered what was so special about him. His father had told him not to antagonize him, but really hadn't said why. Stupid Potter, he thought as he glared at him. It's like they think he is the bloody Dark Lord or something. Draco didn't care. He was angry at Potter for calling him, and his father, Gryffindors, and he swore revenge. He didn't care what his father said, he was going to get back at Potter. Salazar sat at the breakfast table eating his omelette and drinking his milk, completely oblivious of the fact that he was being watched so closely. He had decided to catch up on his herbology reading this morning, and try to find a way to dumb down his essay that he had to write for it. It was rather hard, and irritating, having to write like he was an 11-year-old, but that is what he had to do. Nora was, as always, sitting in front of his plate, but this morning she seemed to be restless over something because she was slithering back and forth across the table. He lowered the book slightly and looked at her. "Nora, are you all right?" he asked. "Speaker, where is Pigeon?" she asked, stopping briefly to look at him. It seemed that she had been waiting for him to notice her distress. "She is still out delivering the letter I told you about. I suspect she won't be back for a few more days." "Why? Are you worried about her?" "Of course not," she said with a huff. "It's been rather quiet without that haughty feather duster coming in here every morning to steal your breakfast." "I see," Salazar said with a slight chuckle, and went back to reading his herbology book. A few minutes passed, and Nora continued to slither back and forth in front of him. After another minute or so, however, her head popped up over the top of the book and she peered at him with concern in her eyes. "Speaker, do you think Pigeon is all right?" Salazar suppressed a chuckle, but he couldn't stop the grin from breaking out on his face. "Yes, my dear, I do think Hedwig is all right. She is a smart owl. She will be back soon." "All right," Nora said, a sigh. A few moments later the owls arrived to deliver the morning mail. Both of them looked up to see if Hedwig had returned, but when there was no snowy white owl to be seen, Nora sighed again and continued her pacing. However, just as Nora began to ask another question, an old brown barn owl literally fell out of the air and almost landed on her. She began hissing angrily, but the owl paid her no mind as it rolled over and hopped up, sending a plate of toast crashing to the floor as it did so. It dropped the red envelope it was carrying, and immediately took off again. Salazar stared at the letter confused, but Nora started hissing at it. "Speaker, that letter is moving. Are you in danger? Shall I bite it?" "No, Nora, it's just a howler," he said, as he reached out to open it. "What is a howl?" "Harry James Potter," the howler bellowed in a shrieking woman's voice. "It's a banshee," Nora cried when the howler paused for a moment, and she dived under Salazar's herbology book to try and get away from the noise. "How dare you tell that bloody snake of yours to attack my son? My boy Ron Weasley is a good boy, and if I find out you or your snake have attacked him again, you won't like the consequences. I knew your mother Lily, and she would be ashamed to know that her son." Salazar had had enough of the woman's rude and obtrusive screaming, and stood up. He calmly pulled his wand out and began waving it around the howler. The air around it became frigid and the howler began to freeze solid. The screaming stopped, but the heat from the vibrating howler was causing it to melt, so he surrounded the thing in a small block of ice and it fell to the table with a loud clunk. Then he levitated it, and forcefully sent it flying into the solid stone wall in the back of the great hall, where it exploded into 1,000 pieces in one of the corners. The entire hall was dead silent and staring at him, but Salazar ignored them and looked over at the Gryffindor table. Ron was red in the face and scowling at him, but his brothers were looking at him in awe with their mouths hanging open, before they turned and grinned at each other. Salazar just raised an eyebrow at Ron before smoothing out his robes, and calmly sitting back down. 10 PP points to Slytherin and Mr. PP Potter. Quirrell called out loudly. Excellent work. "Thank you, Professor," Salazar replied, slightly nodding his head in acknowledgement, and Quirrell chuckled. Snape half smirked, half scowled in his direction. McGonagall stared at him wide-eyed, but Dumbledore just shook his head and looked at him. Salazar ignored Albus, just like he had been doing for the last few days. "Speaker, you silenced the banshee." "Yes, I did. It was rather rude and I didn't appreciate it. I could have disposed of the howler without the pomp and flair, but I wanted to prove a point." "I think you made a very good point. You made the banshee explode." "Does the carrot belong to the banshee?" "He looks angry," she asked. Salazar nodded. "Yes, he does." "I will bite them," she said in a huff, as she glared over in Ron's direction. Salazar just laughed and kept on reading his herbology book. He couldn't be bothered about the howler. He had to concentrate on impersonating an 11-year-old, and it was getting harder and harder to do that with each passing day.
Hello everyone, Nat1995 here in the video game fanfic plot with news. We have new merch, t-shirts, hoodies, and stickers. Originally I posted a video that I'm starting to sell merch of the Creepypasta crew. I decided to take that out because I don't read any of the Creepypasta fanfics, so yeah. This new merch just is a simple design of my avatar reading a book to you all. I do hope you enjoy, and let me know what you guys think. I will leave a link down to the store itself. And remember to hit that like button, leave a comment down below. Until next time.